Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you.
Just want to remind you why I stand in front of you week in and week out. It's not to make much of us as a church. It's not to make much of Midtown. It's not even to make much of you, but of Christ in you. And John the Baptist put it well, he's got to become less and he's got to become more. And in life, there are plenty of distractions that will make Christ smaller and us larger. James hits on one today. And we're gonna plow through it. We're gonna hit a lot of scripture. Just a heads up, a lot of scripture. If you got a Bible and you want to follow along, it might be a good idea. Simply because I won't be able to dig into them as much as I would on a regular basis. But the global view of what these scriptures will present will help us get a good picture of our perspective or a new perspective on money. Last week, we talked about your perspective on life, and we answered a couple questions. Real quick, just a teaser for next week. I was presented with a question a couple weeks ago. Why pray if God's sovereign? Why pray if God's will has been determined? Let's really kind of lock this in real quick just to pique your curiosity to tease you out next week, because this is an important question. Why would you pray if you can't change the mind of God? Can you? Moses seems like he did, but you sit in the hospital waiting room praying your hearts out, and yet the result didn't change for that loved one. You're a child and you're watching your parents go through a divorce, and you pray and nothing changes for the good. Think about it. Something the skeptics may ask you one day. Why pray if you believe God is truly sovereign and in control? This is a good answer, and we're going to hit that next week. I know you probably want the answer now, but we'll hit it next week. You already know the answer. I want to pull it out of you. Okay, the answer is within you, and I want to pull it out. Last week we talked about how do you know the will of God for your life? Just quick summary. You can't. You really don't know the future. If you did know the future and what it held, would you have a need for faith? Would you have a need for trust? But here's what you can know. That every step you take is established by the Lord. And that there is not a step you take, a breath you breathe that is outside the will of God. Which causes more questions. Questions that are hard to wrestle with, but we can wrestle together and come up with a biblical answer. Is it God's will for sin? Is it God's will for pain? Is it God's will for affliction? Is it God's will for death? Is it God's will? If every step we take is established by the Lord, then where does sin come from? You see, I don't want to be afraid to raise questions that are legitimate, that may be asked you one day by someone searching for the answer. But last week, what we saw through Proverbs 16, we saw it through James 4, is that it is his will for you to live. Without that, you don't live. Your life, the biological form of you would be gone. And so if you're alive, you are in the will of God, and therefore you have plans and desires which are the design of God put into you. You are living out the will of God for your life. Well, how does a loving God allow pain and suffering? You see, these are legitimate questions that we can have answers to. We're not going to answer them all today, but we will answer them, and we have answered them in the past as we go through Scripture. Very solid, biblical-based answers. How do you handle life when it doesn't go as planned? I mean, if it's all part of God's will, why does life not go as planned? Well, whose plans are we talking about? What is as planned? Is as planned like a convenient lifestyle? I mean, that's how I would plan my life, right? That the money's coming in, the relationships are working, the church is filling up. That's my plans. It doesn't go according to my plans, but it's going according to someone else's plan. You know that guy you said last week that is in all control, there are no mistakes, that knows your future, that knows every detail about you, God, he has a plan. But when it doesn't go according to my plan, so what do I do? What do you do when life falls apart? Well, we all have our processes, right? I showed you one last week. Sing your way back to faith and trust. Sing old hymns. Maybe you pray. Maybe you offer thanksgiving for what you have. Maybe you go out and show acts of mercy and love, but you engage the Spirit of God in you to restore you back to that place that you were at just before chaos happened. You see, you're okay even though you don't feel okay because God's presence is in you. Because life isn't what you are seeing here and now. Life is bound up in what is eternal. So it leads us into a couple questions for today. Question one is more of a very topical, direct question. If you've been defrauded and you cannot shake the anger, what do? Somebody stole from you. Somebody lied to you. Somebody hired you to do something and never paid you what they owed you. But this takes on many forms. To be defrauded means to be deceived, to be lied to, right? To follow someone and then have them let you down. They purposely did not follow through what they said they were going to do. And you just can't shake the anger. But forget the defraud. I mean, there's people harm you and do wrong to you, and it stirs anger and bitterness, and you can't shake it. Just in general, what do? We have some principles in James 5 we will see, but there's a more global question that will be answered today. It's brought up in James 5. How do you store up treasure in heaven? I mean, have you ever stopped to think about this? We're told to store up our treasures in heaven. How do we do it? This was the rich young man's problem. He stored up treasures in the wrong account. He had to empty that account and store up his treasure in a new account. How do you store up treasure in heaven? And I hope today you leave with a very clear answer how this is done. In order to do that, we want to go to Jesus' words and see what he says about what is heaven. Where does heaven exist? We'll get there. So James 5, starting at verse 1, I love the way James 5 is laid out. He brings you through your riches and how they corrode, and then how you've stored up your riches for the last days. James 5, verse 1, come now, you rich, weep and howl. Stop! Because I know the way many of you think. Because I'm human. I just acknowledge the way I think is probably the way some of you think, if not most of you. Come now, you rich. You rich. He's categorized the people he's talking to, right, as the rich. You may think there's somebody richer than me out there, so he's not talking to me. I make $30,000 a year. Just generally speaking, I make $30,000 a year. There's somebody out there that makes $40,000. They're richer than me, so it doesn't apply to me. It applies to them. I'm not a millionaire. This applies to the millionaires, the billionaires, the trillionaires. It doesn't apply to me because there's people out there that are more rich than I am. Just in case your mind did that automatically as you read this, come now you rich, and you go, all right, that's not me. Just to use your logic against you, people poorer than you. In their shoes, you're the rich. And so using that logic to remove yourself from being talked to actually places you back into the narrative. Because if there's poorer people than you out there, you are then the rich in their eyes. So let's just say he's talking to us, okay? And not to bring up statistics about Americans and Westerners and whatnot. Let's just see what is in this passage for you and me, regardless of how much money there is to our name. Weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. You rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted. He's now kind of fast forward to what the miseries are. Your riches have rotted. Your garments are moth-eaten. I mean, I open my closet, moths aren't gnawing at my clothes. But I definitely see the fades and the tears and the wrinkles that don't come out anymore, and the grease stains, the holes in the jeans. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you. Just think about this for a moment. Stuff on its own falls apart. In fact, we saw last week, you need God to stay alive. Right? Your house needs you to stay in a working condition. Your car needs a mechanic. Your car's not going to repair itself. Your gold's not going to get the tarnish off itself. The rust isn't going to scrape itself away. Part of the miseries he's talking about, the corrosion, the rust, he's showing you that stuff does not maintain itself. Life cannot maintain life. It has to have a life giver to maintain it. You have to have God to continue your life. Your house needs a repairman or needs life in it to keep the roof from leaking, the toilets flushing, etc. Your car needs a mechanic. So the more you have, the more you become enslaved. The more you have, the more effort that is required to keep your stuff alive. The more maintenance that is required. There's misery in and of that. Some of you know it. The more you have, the more you seem to spend your time repairing what you have. And that's a distractor from life. We're not saying right or wrong. It's just something to acknowledge. The more you have, the more of yourself you're giving to yourself. The simpler your life is, the less you have to give of yourself, and the less you are enslaved. Their corrosion will be evidenced against you. What is that evidence? We'll get to it in a second. And will eat your flesh like fire. See, that's the misery. You are giving of yourself, your flesh, your blood, your sweat, your more of your money. It's just eating you up alive. To continue in the luxurious lifestyle that you have. You have laid up treasures in the last days. Your stuff that is rotting. Your house that is falling apart. Your car that does not continue to drive its own. That transmission that failed. Your health that is failing is evidence that you are in a season in the last days where it will come to an end. God has been partially removed. The sustainer of life, because of sin and because of the fall, is no longer, the spirit is now, life comes dead upon arrival. We must connect to the life himself to have life eternally. You're in the last days. It will be wiped out. Your stuff is evidence that it will not last. Your stuff is evidence that the world's coming to an end. I'm not trying to be doom and gloom. I'm just trying to magnify what James is saying. These last days, your stuff that is rotting, the Creator has been somewhat removed. And Romans says, and creation groans. As the stuff corrodes and it's just falling apart, it's groaning for the revelation of the adopted sons of God who will come back and bring and keep life to it for eternity. But in the meantime, the chairs you sit in that are slowly getting the curve to your high end, and it's not coming back anymore, is evidence we're in the last days. The stains in the carpets that are not coming out are evidence of the last days. The tread that's wearing on your it's all evidence that we need God back. You need God. It's evidence of a creator and a sustainer of life outside of ourselves, because we can't keep it going. We ourselves can't keep ourselves going. And then, so now he turns, so far he hasn't really brought up a problem. He's just brought up what's going on. But now here's the problem. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, by deceit, the wages are crying out against you. It says the wages are crying out against you. I understand it's heavy. But if you have defrauded people, and you haven't paid people what you owe them, the wages are crying out against you. You shook hands with someone and said, I will give you $20 if you do this, and you kept back some of the 20 or all of the 20, the wages that are in your bank account cry out against you. They don't belong there. They belong in the other person's bank account. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You see how God set this up? You may not be crying out. Those laborers may not be crying out, but God hears the cries of the injustice, of the unrighteousness that is being committed against his creation. He sees the money in the wrong bank account. He sees that laborers have given of themselves, and he hears the cries. You have lived on earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. And this is where it gets really heavy. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter, in the last days. You've condemned and you murdered the righteous. He's not resisting you. You've condemned and murdered. You held money back. That's all you did. You've held portion of money back. And God says, no, you've murdered that person. I just try to wrap our heads around, how are we murdering this person? Well, starters, you've placed your money over them. You love your money more than them. But also, they have given of their flesh. They have given of themselves. They have given calories. They have given time. They have given of their flesh and bone. That, their flesh isn't lasting forever. Arthritis may be kicking in for them. For those of you who work in a labor, intensive business, giving of yourself can hurt. But it's what you do. You'll never get that back. You'll never get that time back. And so if you've frauded someone out of money, you've essentially killed part of them. they'll never get that part of them back. You've taken advantage of them. It doesn't belong in this church. It doesn't belong amongst us. We make agreements. There are nonverbal agreements, and we just keep them. And we'll get to that as to why here in a minute. But if you've been this person that has been defrauded, you've been robbed, you've been lied to, you've been deceived, you cannot shake the anger. What do? There's several things. I want to give you several tips here, just from a person who has been in this boat, just simply by the nature of my business. The first few go-arounds of not getting paid, I mean, it hurts worse, and then eventually you get used to it, but then you eventually learn habits and behaviors. But there's some keys here. Number one, your life is not wrapped up around money. Money doesn't sustain you. God sustains you. Let's keep our priorities in check here. God is the giver of your life and the sustainer of your life, not your money and not your bank account. God is, hands down. That's it. Know where your life comes from. Know who sustains it. His economy is what keeps you going. Second, he set up a system that is on your defense. The wages are crying out. You're crying out. He hears it. He hears the pain you're going through. He's on your side. Vengeance belongs to the Lord. Your anger is like a double whammy. You understand? They've already taken advantage of you, but now they're occupying time and space in your mind and your emotions. Don't let it happen. Just know God's on your side. They can't stand against you. You will be raised up in the end. Let it go. Move on. A couple quick tips so you don't walk into these traps. People who are quick to flatter, I stay away from. If they want to compliment my work without ever seeing my work, there's something odd about that. Okay? And those are the people that I have experienced that, I say flatter, not just like, hey man, nice to meet you, but like just overdo it. If something doesn't sound right, it's just, just understand if flags are thrown in your mind. God may be speaking. Also, ask a lot of questions about the person. Get to know the people that you're going to work for. Just ask inquisitive questions and try to get to understand their behaviors and patterns of life. And you can probably pick up clues as to, do you want to work for these people or not? You can learn how to avoid the enemy in the bushes. All right, there's a spirit of God in you, and He's going to guide you if you stay open. Don't be too desperate for money that you're led by the nose by money. Just keep trusting in God at the forefront. It'll all work out. Okay. There's just some tips on that. But so how do you store up treasures in heaven? Back into like the meat of this, how do you store up treasures in heaven? This has got to be an important thing. It's repeated several times. It comes from the mouth of the Son of God Himself. How do you store up treasures in heaven? It's not an illustrative thing. It's not a metaphor. This is it's a practical thing you can do every day. How do you do it? This phrase, store up treasures in heaven, comes from Matthew 6. Matthew 6, of course, Matthew didn't write in chapters and verses. But if you look at the flow of Matthew 6, you ask two questions. One, does Jesus speak in this sequential order? Or is Matthew writing in a sequential order for a purpose? One of those two is true, and it's to get to a point. Matthew 6 has kind of like gathered these thoughts and is pointing you in a direction. I'm going to move quick. For the sake of time, it's 11:26. Smokes. Man, I'm going to blow through some stuff here. I'm afraid I'm going to do this justice. I'm about ready to can at the moment and come back to it next week. I did not realize how late it was. Can you go tell me if the kids are dying back there, Steve? Yeah, just go see the status of the children. I'm going to start moving through this, and I may choose to pick it up next week. I'm going to move quick regardless, but This is key. What your money has purpose, eternal purpose. So, some of you are like, man, I kind of hope he pulls the trigger now. It'd be nice. There's a football game on in 34 minutes. And others of you are like, no, man, we got to plow through this. Be spiritual. Hold on, 25 more minutes, man. The real Baptist can do this for 4 hours. Oh, Matthew 6, the outline. All right, let's just start creeping through it. Okay, we'll see what happens. Verses 2 through 4, giving to the needy. How do you give to the needy? That's what Matthew 6, 2 through 4 is about. All right? And by the way, you can leave whenever. I may have to swallow my pride and my ego, Cindy, but that's all right. My life is not bound up in you. It's bound up in it's hard to know that sometimes as people walk out. How are they doing over there? Okay. See, good job, man. They're doing okay. It's very specific. It wouldn't hurt if I sped it up. Matthew 6, 5 through 15, instructions. Actually, I wanted you to leave. I had something to say. 5 through 15, instructions on prayer. All right, so you're going to feel like Matthew's just shotgunning this. But he's not. Try to tie this together, okay? Part of what I want to do up here is to teach you how to interpret Scripture and to pull out these principles. Giving to the needy, instructions on prayer. It's the Lord's Prayer. Lord willing, we will do that next week, or maybe we will redo this next week. It's the Lord's Prayer. How do you pray? And if you look at the Lord's Prayer, it's mostly, God, this is your stuff. This is your will. What you give me belongs to you. I'll forgive others because you forgave me. It's your kingdom. Whatnot. It's all about God, and I insert myself at forgiveness, and hey, can you toss me some bread? It's about it. And then we move to fasting. How not to self-indulge. Giving to the poor. God, this is your kingdom. Give to me what I need. I'm going to forgive others. Now fasting. I'm going to shut down my flesh for a season to teach it something and to teach myself something. My life is not bound up in my flesh. So I can go hungry. Right? Fasting has some principles in and of itself that teaches you not to be self-indulgent. There's several purposes to it. Then we go into lay up treasure in heaven. Lay up treasure in heaven. Then, do not be anxious about tomorrow, about what you will eat or drink. Give to the needy. Pray. Hey, God, man, I need your help. Give me what I need. This is all yours. I'm going to shut my flesh down. I'm going to shut myself down. And I'm going to really trust that you're going to provide for me. I'm going to store up treasure in heaven, and I'm not going to be anxious about tomorrow. Can you start to see the umbrella idea here? Okay. Let me take a poll. I think 15 minutes is what I need. Do you want to come back to this next week, or do you want me to continue through it today? Cindy, it's okay. You can go. I know you got rooms to clean and, babysitting that has to happen. It's got to stop. The word reward 7 times in Matthew 6. I will pick up speed here, and maybe I'll hit on next week too. See, look at that. 7 times in Matthew 6. All right, 5 times it's, hey, people have already taken their reward. 2 times is the Father will give you a reward when you do what you do in secret. Matthew 6, 2 through 4, let's look at it real quick. It's about giving to the needy. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Why? Well, they're doing a good thing. They're giving to the needy. But they're self-indulging. They need something. They need something to thrive and to live. That's the praise of people. So they're paying for it. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. When you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, right? Instincts. When you act upon instincts, you don't know what you're doing. You're just doing it. This is what Jesus is saying. This should be instinctive to you. Not that you're just hiding your right hand, the left hand. It's not like that. It's that this is so natural to you, giving to the poor, that you don't even know you're doing it. And your Father, so that your giving may be in secret. But when you do things instinctively, you're just not concerned about the public eye. It's not even go do this in private. I mean, because that could be an exercise of religion. It's just this needs to become a part of the way you breathe. Breathing is an involuntary muscle. Giving to the poor should be involuntary. It just happens. You see a need, it happens. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Now let's fast forward to Matthew 6:19. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. Do not do that. Do not do it. Moth and rust destroy, and thieves break in and steal. It sounds like James stole from Jesus. James probably heard Jesus say this, and it impacted him. Lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Your heart is the seat of emotions. If you lay up your treasures on earth, your heart will be there. James says, what? Miseries are coming upon you. Good luck sustaining your joy. Good luck sustaining your peace, your kindness. If you lay up your treasures here on earth, you're going to watch them corrode. And you're going to watch your excitement and joy in life just tumble. But if you lay up treasures in heaven, your heart will be there, and you will see yourself be rooted in your emotions, because that's where your heart will be. Then it takes this turn. The eye is the lamp of the body. What does this have to do with laying up your treasure in heaven? Everything. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? This was the rich young ruler's problem. His eyes were bad. When you walk through this world and you walk amongst the streets and you see stuff, what does your eye see as valuable? What does your eye see as requiring, desiring, needing your money? What is most important to you? What deserves your investment? Well, the eye is picking up information everywhere it goes. It sees people, it sees cars, it sees property. What is it that you see as important? Well, if the eye deems that possessions are important, well, fine. Moth and rust are going to take them away. Miseries will come upon you before you know it. The eye is bad. The eye is full of corruption. But if the eye is full of light, it will see something of greater importance. The same thing Jesus saw. People like you and me. What does your eye see as requiring, needing your investment? The rich young ruler missed this. This is why Jesus said, hit the reset button on your riches. You have seen for the longest of time that what you need is stuff in life. Go give it all away. Go sell it all. Let's fix your eyeballs. And let's begin to see that the poor, that the people are what are most important. That love is most important. That mercy is most important. You can't, and then he goes back into this. So he ties this idea together. You can't serve two masters, right? You can't have light and darkness. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You can't serve God and money. How do you serve God? Well, he's found in you. John 14, his home is in you. Serving each other is serving God. But you can't serve God and money. So that's how the eye is bad or the eye is good. Luke 12 talks about the barn, the man building the barn. But it starts off with this. Someone in the crowd said, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And he deferred. He said to them, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you? He's the Son of God." He said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all covetousness." Let it go, man. Let it go. You're pursuing the wrong thing. One's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Just be aware of that. Go sell it all and go live under a tree. You need to know that.